So what I might do is we might kick off today. So thank you so much everyone for joining us for today's webinar, which is all around decarbonisation and some of the changes within Australia's legislation and trends overseas that we are observing, and some of the projects and activities that we're putting in place to help industry prepare for these changes. So thanks very much for taking the time to join us. Today is being recorded. And so we will be able to circulate that recording to everyone who's registered and through our member newsletter as well, to be available should anyone want to forward this on or watch this at a later date as well. We have a star-studded group of presenters joining us today, which is fantastic, to be able to talk to us about this topic and its impacts through the broader agricultural space, and then also some of the specific projects that we're putting in place, particularly to target practice change within the aquaculture sector. So my name is Julie Petty. I work with Seafood Industry Australia, and I'll be hosting today's webinar. We'll have plenty of opportunities for people to jump in and ask questions as we're going along today. Firstly, I would like to do a quick welcome to country. So would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land and our oceans and waterways, past and present. We've got a really close connection with Indigenous users in the fisheries and aquaculture sector, going back thousands of years. So really pleased to be able to bring you all along on this journey and be able to talk to everyone today about the next phase and the next technologies that may be of interest to us all more broadly across the sector. What I will do is I'll just quickly share some slides. So we've got some information here around a bit of background about how this presentation and webinar has come about. So let me just try and figure out how, here we are, here's the share button, I'm all over it. Okay, so our topic today in today's webinar is all around alternative energy solutions for the aquaculture sector, which is hopefully why you're all here as well and you haven't dialed into the wrong meeting. Seafood Industry Australia and Blue Economy CRC applied for some funding through the Fisheries RDC, FRDC, to look at options to investigate decarbonisation pathways for the aquaculture industry. So that's very much, this webinar series is a component of that project that we've been funded to roll out, which is looking at how we can better communicate some of the activities that have been running today within this project and some of the opportunities for industry to get more involved, outputs that we will be delivering that you may be interested in as well. This was part of an FRDC open call to build capability and capacity in the decarbonisation space. So we very much wanted to look at the very broad variety of needs that exist within the aquaculture sector and the, I guess, sort of broad number of possible solutions, technologies and service providers that potentially could be applicable depending on what your problem or your use case is. However, before we get into all of that, I'd like to welcome our group of presenters here for today's session. So our first speaker today is the lovely Richard Heath. So Richard is joining us from the broader agriculture sector, and Richard is going to give us a bit of a rundown about some of the changes that are happening in legislation and regulation that we are seeing now or expecting to happen, and possible flow-through impacts that this might cause through the broader supply chain, the food supply chain. So Richard has professed that he's not an expert in aquaculture, but that's okay because we all are. And so he's going to bring in that broader perspective about what is happening there. And Richard comes with a broad background in this space and is currently leading a number of different programs and activities in the carbon kind of space. We have also got with us today our project partners, Angela Williamson from the Blue Economy CRC. So she's going to talk about a portion of the project that Blue Economy is delivering as part of the project, which includes some on-ground tactical trials out with a number of our commercial seafood partners, She's also joined by Simon, who's working in the Blue Economy team. And we have Tom Constantino joining us as well, who is on board as project manager, and some of you may be familiar, helped us with the Wildcatch decarbonisation project that ran a couple of years ago as well. So we've dragged him along into this one to make sure we take all of the learnings and knowledge and outputs that were generated from that first project and make sure those are not forgotten and brought along into the deliverables and activity for this aquaculture focused project. So without further ado, Richard, if you'd like to start sharing your slides, I'm happy to jump across to you to present for your section of the webinar. And if you would like to start firstly by, we've got a big variety of people present in the webinar at the moment, from abalone, there's a bit of lobster in the room as well, farmed prawns. So you've got a pretty broad audience here. Just for your own benefit.
Thanks, Julie, and thanks for the opportunity to speak today. And as Julie has already pointed out, apart from very much enjoying eating all of those products, I'm certainly by no means an expert in production. So what I thought I'd concentrate on today is I'm going to talk specifically about one piece of legislation in particular around decarbonisation, which is universally important to the economy, no matter what sector you're in, and then the implications of that for the seafood industry that are, again, pretty universal for any food supply chain. And then I'd finish just with a little bit about our CRC in terms of an industry approach to delivering solutions to deal with that particular issue that I'll talk about decarbonisation in food supply chains and some of the pressures around doing that. So the piece of legislation I'm going to be talking about is the National Greenhouse Energy Reporting Scheme. So it's got a fancy legislative title, the Treasury Laws Amendment. It was passed last year, and it basically sets out the terms for mandatory sustainability reporting that come into effect this year. Now, initially, and what I'll concentrate on today in terms of that mandatory sustainability reporting, it is to do with greenhouse gas reporting. There is some anticipation that over time, those attributes that you need to be able to report against in that mandatory scheme could expand further into other sustainability attributes, things like biodiversity and other ESG measures. Just raising that as a flag. Don't propose to talk about that today. It's really just the greenhouse gas and carbon reporting impact that I'm going to talk about today. So essentially what it does is it requires certain organisations to make really detailed disclosures about their climate-related risks and opportunities. It's commencing with very large organisations, but will filter through almost the entire economy over a few years. The various talks and seminars I've been to around this, and particularly sort of in the director community, they're talking about this as the biggest change to corporate reporting in a couple of generations. It's a genuinely significant and really big impact and change to corporate reporting and the sorts of information that needs to be collected. So what does it mean for the seafood industry in particular? But, you know, as I said, you could really transfer this to pretty much any food supply chain. The first thing is there's going to be compliance and reporting costs that are inescapable. I mean, we all know the compliance and reporting costs that we have now around the mandatory financial reporting that we're all exposed to. So we're going to have to bring a whole lot of other measures into that and have ways of collecting that information and reporting it. All of that's going to come at some sort of cost. There's going to have to be systems built. There's going to have to be measurement, transaction costs that go towards being able to do that effectively. Once you start doing that, and this is a really interesting context of this, I think that perhaps hasn't received as much attention so far. I'll talk about a little bit more further on as well. Once that reporting is in place, then there will be even more pressure to do something about the numbers that you're reporting. Just like there is with financial reporting now for shareholders of companies, the whole point of financial reporting is that people want to see those numbers so they can understand whether you're improving or not and where there needs to be change. It will be no different for mandatory climate reporting. It's not good enough just to report the number. You actually need to then demonstrate, well, if the number's not good enough, what are you doing about it? And that starts to impact on your market position, which then impacts on the investment and financial implications for the business. Showing improvement, showing that you're not an outlier, being able to demonstrate that you are improving those numbers around greenhouse gas emissions. I don't think there's any question that that is going to have an impact on your attractiveness in terms of investment and affordable finance. To meet all of those demands, there will need to be operational adjustments in every supply chain to innovate, to adapt new practices, to show a decarbonisation pathway within the supply chain, how you are doing things that improves your position. All of that goes towards what we actually, there is a very positive aspect of all of this, which is the fundamental driver for why we need to report these climate impacts, is that we are all experiencing the negative impacts of climate change. By reporting this information, organisations will show as they, as part of the entire wider economy, are managing that risk of climate change, adapting to climate change, and eventually actually mitigating climate change by bringing in new practices. And then finally, just the global trade and export considerations, which are an increasing trade barrier. Really interesting, and again, I'll just flag this as an issue. Don't propose to get too much into in this talk. I think over the last 6 months, there's a lot of perceptions about how that global trade and export environment may change with some of the political changes around the world at the moment. My opinion is that it may slow down a little bit. There mightn't be quite the same urgency that there was previously, but I think because of particularly that previous point, that there is enough data now and enough understanding, particularly in global finance, that unless we all do something about climate change, and particularly companies do something about climate change, the risk to future profits, the risk to capital is just so high that regardless of the regulatory environment, there will be that financial pressure to do things, which will continue to have that impact on global trade. When's all this coming in? So it's in place now only for the very largest companies that need to start reporting. But from next year, it'll start to flow into a lot more companies, any companies with revenue over $200 million or more than 250 employees. And then by 1st of July 2027, companies with revenue greater than 50 million or 100 employees, which, as you would imagine, starts to capture a very large percentage of the economy. So that's the legislation, that's the impact. What can you do about it as an industry in a food supply chain? And so I'm going to talk a little bit now about our particular CRC. So the Zero Net Emissions Agriculture CRC is actually the largest cooperative research centre that's ever been funded by the federal government. And we have a very simple goal, which is to decrease the emissions associated with Australian agriculture. What a comparative advantage do we have in that area compared to other efforts in the space? We are a national, industry, sector-wide, so we are all of agriculture. You'd all be aware of the RDC network. It's not that the RDCs aren't doing work in this space, but coordinating that under one umbrella to provide whole of agriculture-wide solutions is where we have an advantage. We also have an advantage in that we're a 10-year funding venture, so we have some certainty in funding. We have some, we can really think long term in the projects that we're doing. The other thing that we're doing, and this is particularly in the context, particularly the beef industry, but a little bit more generally in agriculture, is we talk about a flexible stack of measurable solutions, and that's referring to the fact that there will not be a silver bullet to reduce emissions. There may have been a lot of hype around particular things, Asparagopsis, for instance, seaweed for reducing methane emissions from cattle. That's just not how it's going to work. Reducing emissions in any supply chain is going to be a continual improvement of incremental technologies. Just like efficient supply chains improve with technology, as we always have, reducing emissions is really going to be no different to that. And so again, our advantage in the CRC is that we are going to concentrate on what is those stack of technologies, how can we demonstrate their effectiveness and put them together so that farmers understand a package of solutions and not just one silver bullet, which is just not going to come. So again, our challenge, reduce emissions from Australian agriculture, and this is really important now also, while maintaining productive, profitable and sustainable enterprises. This CRC is not interested in reducing emissions for the sake of reducing emissions. We are an agriculture farming system CRC that is interested in maintaining agricultural enterprises while we reduce emissions. It is a significant issue that we're addressing. Agriculture contributes 17% of Australia's greenhouse gas emissions. It's the third largest contributor. And the reality is over time, we're likely potentially to become the biggest emitter, but certainly our share will grow as the energy and mining sectors have technology pathways to continue to reduce their emissions. It's just a matter of the economies of scale starting to work for them to continue to do that. Agriculture is more difficult because of the biological nature of the enterprise of agriculture. It's biology. We have emissions. We're never going to have zero emissions. We can reduce them as much as we possibly can. We're always going to have some emissions. And so our proportion of the overall emissions is going to increase over time. We will invest where the emissions are. So in agriculture, that is methane. It's 77% of the emissions come from methane, 20% from nitrous oxide, and the rest being carbon dioxide. So our focus, and I'll spend just the rest of my talk now sort of focusing on that in terms of how we're going to invest and put it together, and sort of wrap that up in terms of this framework or an approach which we think any industry can really think about if they're trying to put together a program to address reducing emissions. We've got 4 fundamental research pillars. The first 2 are really developing the technologies that farmers will apply to their existing production methods to reduce emissions. And they are plants, essentially plants and animals. Plant solutions are still going to, while it's working on plants, it's still going to focus very much on methane because it is developing new pastures, new ways of grazing animals to reduce methane loads. And there's a lot of work that we can do there, really quite a lot of low-hanging fruit with more efficient pastures that immediately reduce methane. We're also working on fertiliser efficiencies and fertiliser emissions for nitrous oxide. Program 2 is working on the animals directly through either genetics, through breeding, through rumen manipulation, and again, that technology stacking piece that I talked about before. I'll go to program 4 first, and I'll come back to program 3. So program 4 is some of the other things that mightn't be in agricultural systems at the moment that can be brought in that deliver value from the entire economy's transition to net zero. So it's circular economy solutions, it's a renewable energy, and it's how we track all of these things through supply chains as well. The third bit, and this is sort of what I wanted to concentrate on in terms of the framework, how you pull it all together so that you can meet that regulatory change around reporting, so that we can continue to access good finance, markets, all those sorts of things that I've talked about that's going to be a consequence of that regulatory change. Is so that program 3 is about developing the methodologies, the validation systems, the emissions factors, and the reporting systems that demonstrate the emissions reduction that comes from those other pillars that you are going to bring into a farm business. Because it's all well and good to adapt or to adopt a new pasture or improve the genetics of your cows. If you can't demonstrate that that is actually reducing emissions, then you can't demonstrate that you are doing that successfully in your supply chain, which can be reported up through those companies that I was referring to before, that you'd be working with in the supply chain to do that mandatory reporting, which then flows on to things like lack of ability to access cheap finance, insurance, all the implications that are going to happen if you can't meet that mandatory reporting requirement. So that program 3 in our CRC is really the glue that holds the whole thing together about how you work in the broader environment. The first two and the fourth one, they're the really important bits for actually providing the productivity solutions on farm that makes the farm business profitable. But unless you can demonstrate that, report it, monitor it, validate it within the system, a lot of, in the environment we're working in now, a lot of the impact of that improvement won't be realised because you'll be falling foul of those mandatory reporting requirements. So that's it as a brief summary of the CRC, what we're doing. I hope it sort of gave you a bit of a picture of how it might work more broadly in any food supply chain, and particularly in relation to some of those regulatory changes and the mandatory reporting that's coming through.
Thank you so much, Richard. That was awesome. Really great overview of what's happening more broadly in the landscape, which is exactly what we wanted. Thank you. I think the next section of the presentation, we're really going to get into, I guess, how the project that we're talking about today fits in more so into that pillars 3, 4, and a little bit of 5 as well. That's where we've currently got activity through this project. But we might pause there if there's any questions. So you're welcome to raise your hand and I can pop you off mute, or if you want to use the chat function because you're shy and you'd prefer to do it that way, that's absolutely fine as well. Nick. So Nick, Richard, for your benefit, Nick works with the Australian farmed abalone industry. So
yeah, hi Richard. So abalone farmers are very big users of energy in relation to the biomass that we produce. And so unless we're in Tasmania, we have very high carbon emissions per, per tonne of production. But one of the issues seems to be, that stops people from investing on things like solar on farm or batteries or whatever, restrictions with the way that the NEM works. I just wonder, is that something that you're particularly looking at? And with the Nelson report, is that addressing, well, I think the whole point of that is to address how the NEM works. So would you just comment on that, please?
Yeah, look, it's a bit beyond our scope, the national energy market, in terms of some of those structural issues around affordability or attractiveness of investment into renewable energy. What we're working on, just so it fits with our remit of productive and profitable farm enterprises first, is how those sorts of technologies can be integrated into an existing farm business. So things like solar, for instance. How can you put solar panels over a grazing enterprise? Or is there an opportunity to build hydroponic systems and hang them under solar? So that's sort of what our scope is. So I'm sorry, I can't really sort of comment directly on your question. It's a bit beyond what we're doing.
Ange, is there anything you wanted to add in addition to that in response to Nick's question, more from an aquaculture perspective, or we can jump ahead to the next question?
Look, other than it's one of the more, and as I'm sure you'd all be aware, one of the more fraught issues with the direct interventions on emissions reduction in existing ag businesses. And I should have mentioned at the start, for most of my life, I've been a farmer. So, I think of efficiencies in farm business, about how you continually improve the cost of adopting a new technology for a productivity outcome. For all those other improvements, you know, we are aiming to provide simple to understand efficiency improvements. Here's a new technology. Here's some improved genetics. You can make an assessment about, is this actually going to help your farm business? And is there an emissions reduction dividend with that as well? Renewable energy is bringing something new into farm businesses. And with it comes, you know, a whole lot of new risks, new things to consider, which we're only sort of really coming to grips with now, you know, at large scale and beginning to understand. Land tenure implications, bushfire risks, you know, there's issue after issue that we're working through. Just because it is all new, an environment of suspicion and uncertainty, and you know, just how we build these things into not just farming systems but rural economies as well.
Absolutely, no, that's great, Richard. Thank you. Definitely feel your pain there in terms of, you know, we've got to identify those broader benefits to the business. Is there any other questions at all for Richard while we have him here? Richard obviously comes from a really extensive background in this area, and has brought his farmer experience to the room as well, which is great. I think it'd be interesting. Oh, sorry, Tom, across to you.
Look, I'm not sure if I qualify as being a question asker, JP, as part of the project. But yeah, I was interested, Richard. Probably just, this is almost like a more of a personal interest as opposed to a project interest. But like, what are some, or what is one of the top, you know, maybe 3 or 4 best new initiatives you've seen whilst you've worked with the CRC?
Great question, and you know, I've had this a few times in terms of what's the most exciting thing you've seen when you've come in. Where's the technology coming? And you know, I mentioned before, I think there is this unfortunate tendency, in particular the way the media works, to jump on the big shiny new technologies that have a lot of hype around, and you know, this is going to solve the climate change issue. I'm much more excited about the continual improvements that we make in farming systems that now have an emissions context. And there's some really important, really significant initiatives coming through there. So, you know, the pasture improvement I talked about, from a really relatively simple adoption pathway of just putting a different bag of seed in your pasture planted to what you would normally, we can reduce methane emissions by 30%. Like, that's the sort of quantum that we're talking about with improved pastures compared to what we've got now. Just with selecting animals differently and having the estimated breeding values that go to methane efficiency, we can get similar sorts of reduction in methane. And that's permanent, because once you improve that genetic base of the herd, it's going to take a little while to implement over time as you know, herd numbers build. But once you've made that change, it's a permanent change. We're reducing less methane permanently. And so it's not nearly as sexy as a venture-backed, you know, really hyped up technology, but it's actually much more fundamentally significant, and a much more achievable and bigger change to methane reduction in particular.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Very, very, very interesting insights from someone running a CRC for sure.
I think certainly the things that I thought were particularly interesting and what in your presentation, Richard, was those pillars and talking through where are the different activities fit. So we're seeing in the fisheries industry and aquaculture, circular economy initiatives, looking at how we reduce waste, that kind of thing. So there's a number of programs, I think, that are on foot that kind of fit in neatly within those pillars that you described there, which makes sense. Is there any questions from anyone in particular around, you know, some of the, I guess, influences and I guess things that your different supply chains that you are involved with may be required to report on and demonstrate moving forward. Any concerns raised there or questions about that in particular from the audience? Otherwise, what we might do is we'll jump across. While you're thinking about that, actually, let's jump across to the next part of the presentation. We can give you a bit more of a rundown of what this project is all about. So I might leave you to have a breath there and grab a drink, Richard, if you need it. And if it's okay, stay on in case we have any additional questions for you. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, so as I mentioned before, Seafood Industry Australia, in partnership with the Blue Economy CRC, responded to the open call that FRDC ran around initiatives in the decarbonisation space. We recognised that we needed to have a broader suite of tools and resources to enable people in the aquaculture industry to assess different technology and systems that might be coming through that might be relevant to their business, what kind of impact might those make, but also a need to, I guess, get more of that information out within industry itself, so out to the on-ground farm managers and people at the coalface so that they have the tools and information available to be able to make these assessments. And we needed to partner that with a number of sort of on-ground trials so that we can have, I guess, current assessments of different technology and systems within our own industry that we can look to and learn from. So there's a number of deliverables from the project that has been funded at the moment. If I was to summarise those, it's partly around the generation of collection of data and intelligence from the aquaculture industry so that we better understand current needs and how those might flow through into, or current needs and challenges and how that might flow through into advice that we need to provide to government around policy related decisions and influence potential support that the industry might need moving forward to progress in the decarbonisation space, but also using that data to be able to create a better understanding about the profile of each of the different aquaculture sectors that are out there, their needs in particular, and the different technologies that might be of relevance to them or that kind of thing. So it's sort of understanding, I guess, the readiness of adoption of the different aquaculture sectors to some extent. We've done this in partnership, so we've reached out to a number of the different representative bodies and groups out there in industry, including, for example, the West Australian Aquaculture Council, Nick with the Abalone Growers Association, and Kim, for example, as well through the Australian Farm Prawns Association. So we've reached out to all those guys to say, okay, this project is underway. Let's make sure that we reach out and connect with your members and better understand the particular needs of each of your sectors. So there's that kind of two-way information and, I guess, verification as we're going through the project and developing tools and outputs from it, that we can cross-check those with people in the industry to make sure that they are accurate and useful for on-ground implementation. We are also partnering with so there's information that we're extending out through the FRDC Extension Officers Network and looking at developing a number of business cases that we can put forward in partnership, partly through some of these trials that we're looking to run. These are, as I mentioned, some of the partners that we've joined up with through the project. So we're trying to make sure that we have really good reach on ground with the project, with people, as I said, at the coalface, across a number of different aquaculture systems, states, regionality. We've tried to make sure we have the real mixed bag of lollies in the project that we can ensure we capture the level of diversity that's currently out there in the industry. So I might pass across now to Tom, who, as I mentioned earlier, Tom is a project manager for the project, to speak briefly around some of the pathways to impact project, and then we're going to jump across to Angela from the Blue Economy CRC to talk in particular around the 4 different trials that we're running out with industry that they've taken point on in the project. So Tom, across to you.
Thanks, JP. And thanks for having me on the webinar, and thanks for such a good audience so far. And I'm sure there'll be lots more folks watching the recording down the track. I've had a lot of practice now at explaining this project to lots of groups, and that includes primary producers, people working in policy, people doing similar projects, and people from other CRCs, as it happens. So what I've tried to do in all of those presentations is really distill what this project is setting out to do, and the real benefit that all types of stakeholders can gain from it. And what I usually do is break it down and say this project has really two elements. It's kind of the macro element, which applies, to I suppose is comprised of things like industry's climate resilience, generally speaking, the way our industry as a whole can I suppose be prepared for and hopefully leverage the mandatory reporting that's come in and will continue to come in that Richard spoke about, and also just generally raise the positive perception of our industry as well. So this project has a really public-facing side. And this project also has, and to what this slide speaks to, also has a really, I guess, kind of private or business-friendly side as well. And so what a business can take out of this, an aquaculture business, is they can look at this project and look at all of the different options, be it technology or processes or efficiencies that their counterparts within a sector is doing. So that might be, if I use the abalone growers as an example, Nick, one abalone grower looking at a sector profile of other abalone growers and pulling out things that they think might be useful to them. But also, and JP mentioned there are other associations on board, it can be a member of one sector sort of looking over the fence at other sectors and what they're doing to increase their efficiencies. So that is things like the reduction in diesel usage, as the slide mentions, the increase of electrifications. And something that I was thinking when Richard was answering my question is it's not always the new off-the-shelf technology that's, I suppose, moderately market ready. It can be things like running pumps at 90% instead of 100% all day, or it can be optimizing the temperature of a cool room for how heavily it's stocked, for example. So there are also, I suppose, like the less glamorous ways to achieving those things, which industries are sometimes doing, but maybe not like really exploring the fullest potential. And then there's the novel renewable energy sources. And I think these will be talked about a little bit more by Ange when she describes the business cases from some of the pilot projects. But they will also do business cases for those techs. So ultimately, and I think this is mentioned on the next slide, JP, if you don't mind skipping forward one. Ultimately, so I get to sit in a really helpful position in this project because I get to see all the different sectors building profiles. I get to see all the different technologies and their technical readiness assessment. I get to watch along as the early movers do their things. And it all gets tied together in what I keep referring to as the handbook. So this project sets out to produce, I guess, the wordy version, which is the Decarbonisation e-decision map, or what I have coined the handbook. And it does kind of like a one-by-one assessment of all the different technologies that are available in aquaculture and how effective they might be in your business. And then, and I suppose zooming out again, and this is where I come back to the public aspect of the project, is once we've built sector profiles for the different aquaculture sectors. And once we've looked at technologies one by one and their impact on diesel reduction or electrification or carbon emissions more generally, we can start to put together a really fact-based and powerful policy document. The way I see it is that if an industry becomes mature enough to band together to produce a really high quality policy document, it puts itself at the front of the queue when it goes and seeks assistance from the government, whether it's financial assistance or policy settings. And I use in some of my presentations a little bit of a joke slide, but it also has a lot of truth, is that the value of a report like this really increases in proximity to a federal election. So we're coming into one of those and we're putting together a really fact-based report about what our sector does, what our sectors do in this space, and what will be really helpful, or what are the things the government can unlock for us to actually make their benefit felt even more. And that's by the community, by our customers, by our business owners. So in summary, this project is kind of a multifaceted project that everyone from aquaculture businesses right through to policymakers and association stakeholders and other CRCs can hopefully find a benefit from, be it in the macro or micro sense.
Fantastic.
Thank you, JP.
Thank you, Tom. No, that's great. While we're on a roll, we'll jump across to Angela to speak to some of what we're calling our early mover projects, which is these pilots that we've been mentioning in the project. And after that, we're going to jump across back to you guys to see if there's any further questions. So please make sure you pop those into the chat or stick your hand up if you'd like us to come to you for a particular question. We're also going to run through at the end of this a bit of an overview of the next round of webinars in the series that we're putting together to give you a heads up of some of the stuff that will be coming your way, and we'd love to have your engagement with. So now across to you, Angela. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity for another CRC to hear from one of our newest and biggest CRCs, which is really quite exciting. And that's really part of the origin of why the Blue Economy CRC has a role in this project. Is we have, as part of our pillars, our research pillars, we've been looking at alternate renewable energy sources, in particular novel ones that come from ocean-related activity or offshore wind, and broader. And what we really wanted to do was look at a new kind of relationship with FRDC, Blue Economy and Seafood Industry Australia, which allows the ability to leverage from the work we've done to date, the work that we might have been doing with just some partners, not everybody, and the spend that we've already delivered over the last 5 years. Pilot projects is a really important part of this project. When the study was designed, it really acknowledged that Australia's aquaculture industry is a broad church. You have a real mixture of businesses, from your micros and nanos to your SMEs, all the way through to those who will have triggered the legislation that Richard took us through earlier, and who probably have been doing NGAS reporting for a number of years now, and you know, really have to take that further. So what we really wanted to do was work with a number of these companies that were ready, willing to take and share that risk associated with doing something a bit new, a bit novel, and equally exposing some of their inner workings from a business perspective. So our 4 early mover pilot projects are looking at alternate energy solutions and energy efficiencies in Australian aquaculture, and they're kind of each addressing a different aspect of those sustainable operations. I really liked what Richard said around continuous improvement. I think if you were to say what are some of the principles of our work, it most definitely is around productivity, continuity, and finding those efficiencies, and also being able to introduce new solutions backed by evidence and in a safe way where people are rewarded as well. So Reducing carbon footprints and maintaining operational efficiency is fundamental for these. I'm going to start with our first one. It is an innovative approach to energy efficiency in prawn aquaculture, so land-based ponds. So we're working with Tassal Group on building a comprehensive energy efficiency benchmark through advanced aeration technology adoption in commercial prawn aquaculture, so nanobubbles. The trial aims to document and analyse energy consumption patterns across the production process with nanobubble diffusion systems as what we're calling our efficiency intervention. The project will map energy use throughout the 24-hour production cycle across seasons and identify and quantify both direct electricity reduction and indirect efficiencies and productivity benefits across the farm system. The trial will look to capture operational data, build a detailed understanding of energy demand patterns and potential efficiencies and optimisation pathways. By documenting those energy flows and the efficiency interventions across those multiple collection points, the project will look to create an evidence base for carbon reduction through both direct electricity savings and indirect benefits such as improved feed conversion, reduced mortality rates, reduced water usage, pumping needs, and optimised maintenance schedules. This particular pilot will inform the development of a register of available energy efficiencies. So while that first pilot focuses on land-based operations, our next pilot takes us to the marine environment. This trial establishes a practical pathway for reducing emissions in aquaculture on water through an alternate fuel trial in Tasmania. We're working with Huon Aquaculture on this particular initiative. Looks at a percentage reduction of diesel-related emissions from the trial vessel, while also looking at maintaining operational efficiencies and gains. This dedicated partnership structure will contribute to both the trial we're doing, but also look beyond that around trial fuel suppliers, engine manufacturers to support technical implementation. And we've brought government in as well and having conversations with local government and port authorities around understanding regulatory frameworks, as well as addressing safety and handling requirements. So our technical experts will be looking to deliver comprehensive monitoring systems that allows us to track the emissions, performance, and the economic and operational impacts. Standardized measurement approaches and documented cost benefits will support the development of a suite of advisories, business cases, and the likes for potential broader rollout within that business and adoption in other Australian businesses or geographies such as ports or states in the case of this Tasmania case study. Success metrics include emissions reduction achievements, operational efficiency, maintenance, and economic viability demonstrations. Moving from single site to multi-site operations, our third pilot is looking at a comprehensive approach, and we're working with Yamba Aquaculture on this. And this trial looks at a company with operations across multiple sites, so think South Australia, New South Wales, Victoria, and Tasmania, so lots of jurisdictions and engagement and interaction with regulations and policy and grants and the likes for multiple species. Abalone, oysters, and mussels with multiple operational aquaculture modules. We touched on earlier the operational piece, so land-based flow-through systems, intertidal rack systems, and deep water suspended basket and line systems as well. So it's looking at a whole of business opportunities to operate more efficiently and then to reduce reliance on traditional energy sources, so grid electricity, diesel, and petrol, for example, through the adoption of lower carbon options with the potential to reduce the business's carbon footprint as well as reduce operating costs. This particular trial includes a baseline carbon emissions profile across multiple sites and species for the business, identifying production modules and business areas with high carbon emissions, our hotspots, and identifying options and opportunities for emissions reduction, including an emission reduction roadmap with both short, medium, and long-term strategies and actions. It will also include the development of a business case for early trialling or adoption of an emissions reduction technology for one of those identified hotspots. So those three distinct approaches have led us to consider how we can integrate solutions into a cohesive alternate energy renewable system or hybrid. So our final early mover sits more around an integrated or mixed energy system. Think about it in the context of an orchestra. Different instruments playing together create something better than each of them could achieve alone. And let's be honest, it's never going to be a single solution for an industry or sector or companies like ours. So this really looks at multiple energy sources working together for a company that can be further upscaled for a geographical hub, such as through the conversations we've had already, a region in WA or a port. This looks at the application of smart technology controlling the flow, storage, generation, recovery, connected to grid, ideally at this starting point around security, but also modelled emission tracking and register. The other part to this, which is really interesting and fits in this project, but also fits alongside this project, is how that then talks to some of the more nature and biodiversity focused circular economy as well, and how do these two talk to each other. So that's an area that we're still exploring and defining, and you'll have more information on this as our webinar series goes forward. You're going to hear from each of our either companies who have put their hand up to be part of this, or the technical experts who we're working with them to deliver this work. You're going to see those business cases that are being made for industry, and you're going to be able to have a real chance to get and, you know, lift the lid and look underneath at what's going on. They're clearly looking at the potential for transformative change in aquaculture energy systems, and ultimately will impact and inform the decision map, the handbook that Tom talked about earlier. The other part to this, and the reason the CRC is part of this as well, is we're actually weeks away from launching our hydrogen production research facility that has been funded and commissioned and will be delivered by the Blue Economy Cooperative Research Centre. It is the first green hydrogen facility in Tasmania, and it's going to be one of half a dozen around Australia. Now, we touched on earlier, there is no silver bullet, and we're certainly not saying hydrogen is a silver bullet, but what we're offering through this as well is an immersion tour, the ability for industry, government and others to come and have a look at what a hydrogen facility, green hydrogen facility looks like, how you go about creating, what the benefits are, what hydrogen usage can look like, and how that fits into the renewable energy space more broadly. Through that particular study, we are about to be supplying hydrogen for a Tasmanian bus trial. But the other part of this research facilities is it also provides the ability to do modelling for offshore and other operations. So you can have a look at what it would all look like if hydrogen was part of your orchestra that I touched on earlier. So these early mover projects really are about working hand in hand, de-risking some of the processes associated with trying something new, while still maintaining productivity and interest, and ultimately looking to support sustainability aspirations of various companies. So, as I said, you're going to hear more about this moving forward. Any questions, Simon and I are available. We're leading this side of the project. And this ultimately is to help us really understand scalable reform, and also to be able to put forward basis for future funding requests that yourselves or others might be looking for, whether it is jurisdictional funding, grants, FRDC or others. So that's us at this stage. Thank you.
Thanks, Ange. So there's a QR code on the screen there if anyone wants to jump across and follow the project. I will also add, in addition to Ange's presentation too, as a part of the broader orchestra, I really like that analogy. We are going to be speaking to the Project AquaGrid team as well. So Stephanie Thornton and Alex Og about the project that they've recently concluded over in Western Australia, looking at this issue as well. So we're making sure that we're drawing in all of this additional information, and those guys have agreed very kindly to present at one of the future webinars in this series that we're rolling out. But before we jump into more information about the next lot of webinars, is there any questions at all for the team? I've got a few to get us started, but happy to jump across to anyone in the audience if you'd like to raise your hand. Pop something into the chat. Nick, love you. Thank you. Across to you.
Thanks, JP. And just a quick question on Bob Clifford and INCAT building an electric ferry. Interesting that, you know, and that's very close to your hydrogen plant. So any I only heard about it, I don't know much about it. Any comment?
No comment at the moment. We're definitely interested once our facility has been commissioned and we're actually producing hydrogen. And in addition to our metro deal, we most definitely have hydrogen that is available to Tasmanians in particular. So we're going to see where that goes. On the electrification of vessels and electric vessels, Huon, for example, are working with another CRC as well on looking at what that could look like for some of their smaller vessels. And so we've been really interested in ensuring that this particular project doesn't duplicate what's happening anywhere else, and instead we can draw in on that. Nick, if you've got a bit of an interest as well more broadly about what Bob's up to, I'm more than happy to look at bringing him into our webinar series at some point. Or his son.
Yeah, absolutely. Please do let us know if there's a particular speaker you want to hear from or topic you want to hear about. This whole communications, I guess, output is very much designed to try and meet the needs of this group. Any questions at all? Richard, I do want to say thank you again, CEO of the Zero Net Emissions Ag CRC. Thank you so much for coming along and jumping in the deep end, so to speak, with aquaculture. Hopefully we've been able to, I guess, give you a bit of a hankering for some aquaculture products or abalone or prawns, for example, after you jump off. All right, so what we might do then is, so as I mentioned, we've got a whole webinar series that we've been planning out over the next 6 to 7 months. So we're looking to run one of these monthly over that time period. Topics that we'll be covering as in the coming webinars will be things like access to funding. So what is out there at the moment? One of the biggest barriers is around, capital, and how do we help businesses actually fund some of these initiatives, some of the bigger ticket ones that we might be looking at. We'll be getting someone on board to talk about funding implications there. We've got some international perspectives coming in for the group as well, talking about trends overseas and things that we're seeing. As I mentioned, presentation for the Project AquaGrid team on the learnings from their project and some of the things that we need to keep in mind regarding that, as well as hearing from, in particular, some of our project participants along the journey as well. So thank you so hang on, we've got Felicity. Thank you. Thanks very much for joining us. If there's no further questions at all from the group, we can probably wrap there. We will, as we said, we've recorded this webinar, so we'll send that recording around to everyone who's registered, and we'll also have this available on the SAA YouTube channel as well for you, available there. But if there's nothing further, we might wrap there. So thank you again, Richard, Angela, and Tom, and Simon as well for your support in the webinar and presenting that information. Everyone have a wonderful week, and we'll hopefully see you at the next decarbonisation webinar. Take care.